Hi, in this video I will demonstrate a way to go from a Inkscape drawing like this to a zone like this in Kicad. There's a couple things that I want to cover. One is the basics of the script. Then I'll show the steps that I took in Inkscape in order to draw this particular graphic, since many people may not be familiar with it. So let's get started with the script. The script is fairly simple. On my blog I have covered the topic of scripting zones in Kicad before, and there will be a link to the old post for that. I also have a new post that adds some additional details, in particular about having holes in your zones, as well as having multiple boundaries within the zone. Let me demonstrate what I mean by that. So here we have actually two different sort of boundaries. We have the Lydia part here. We also have the period on the eye, which is not actually physically connected to the rest of the zone. What we really want to be able to do is be able to move those things around all together. And having them all be part of the same zone structure enables that to happen. So generally speaking, to create a zone, you'll want to do a board insert area, which board and all those other things are covered on my blog about Kicad scripting. You want to create an area with the first point of the zone. That's the first boundary point. Then we need to get the shape poly set, the outline from the zone container. It's actually more than the outline. Now normally if you just want to create a zone, you're going to use the append function here with only 2 arguments. And the last 2 are generally, you'll just have it use the default values of -1. Now there's a little bit more that goes into the append function here, and I cover that on my blog in a little bit more detail. And I think that it would be better served to look at it there, because there I give the function signature and going into what all of the arguments mean. But really what we need to do here is we either add a hole, which gives us a new hole index, or we add a new outline, a new sort of outer outline, which also gives me a shape index. The shape index there is either passed in as this first argument after the xy, or in the case of holes, we pass in a -1, which says, hey, I'm just adding to the most recent outline added up here in new hole. So that expands a little bit on creating zones within PCB-New. Now to come back to the actual script, here I have a bit of a parser of SVG files, which I have also a post on understanding and parsing SVG. Here I pass in the path name, which in this case, this right here is just a fancy way, perhaps even not the best way, of saying whichever directory that the current file is in that directory is this drawing.svg. For your SVG files, you'll want to change this whole path to be to point to your SVG file, of course. So see here we have shape.bound, and bound can have more. You can have more than one boundary. So here we start off with the insert area on the first boundary, and then subsequent boundaries will be handled down here. And then holes you can find by going to shape.holes, as it is similar to the shape.bound. So let's talk a little bit about how I actually drew this thing here in Inkscape, since you may not be familiar with Inkscape. So let's create a new document. First thing that I want to do is change the document properties so that the area of it is 100 millimeters by 100 millimeters. That's your regular old cheap Seed Studio type of PCB. So then what you're going to want to do is create some text. So here, do that. You can change the font up here to be a different size, make it bigger or smaller. Select here, move things around a little bit. All right. So this is Inkscape, and at this point this is still a text object. It has not been converted into lines. So how do we go about doing that? What we want to do is we select, and then we're going to go up here to do path, object to path. Okay, so it doesn't really look like anything happened, but it has. So if we were to go to this icon over here, the edit paths by nodes, and then click on one of the letters, we'll start seeing that now we have these points which could be edited. So now we have some vectors. So now there's 2 problems that happen with this particular SVG file. One of them is that we have curves. So here, if I use the plus sign to zoom in and the middle button to move, here we have these curves. And Kicad Zones don't support curves. So it has to be straight lines. So that's one thing that needs to be solved. Another thing is that perhaps you want the zones to be contiguous. And so one easy way to do that, just for the sake of demonstration, is I will add a rectangle here. So let's do something like that. Now one goofiness that I've come across, at least in my own usage of Inkscape, is that sometimes if you have this X here selected, then it looks like just an outline. And in that case, it seems like it makes it feel like nothing is really happening. So if you have just this blank thing here, you might want to go up here and click on this first line. And I've had it that even happened that it seemed to be selected, but it still wasn't there. But once I clicked it again, it resolved it. So here we have this rectangle, but I want to maybe stretch it out a little bit. But just like the text, it is not really, it's not a path, it is a actual rectangular object. So if I change this thing here, it remains a rectangle. Again, if I go up to path, object to path, I can now click on here again and do that, and we'll see that, we now have the ability to make something a little bit more interesting, like, okay. All right, so now that we've made things a little bit more contiguous, that solves one of the problems. But the other problem continues to be that we have curves. The best way that I found to get rid of the curves is, first off, to be able to select all of these, which you could do with just select, click on each one of them, but I find that to be a bit tedious. And at first glance, you would think, hey, why can't I just drag and select? And the problem is that the fonts are actually in a group, which to me wasn't obvious, but eventually I figured it out. And to do that, you're going to go to Object and Ungroup. And so now you can select them, and now we have all of these objects here selected. So another sort of interesting thing is that if we select again, things change color again. We have these blue things, which means that now not only are the objects, the paths themselves selected, but also the points among the paths have been selected. And once we've done that, that enables us to do to click on this line here, which says make the selected segments into lines. Okay, so we do that, and so now we'll see that each of these things here has become straight lines. Now, if you don't like how choppy this particular segmentation is, you can do undo, Control Z, and then click up here on the plus in the upper left-hand corner, insert new nodes into selected segments, which really just says to double the number of segments. So now we've done that, and then when we do this here again, things look a little bit smoother. All right, so now the last step that we would want to do is to merge all of these into non-overlapping zones. So if the two things are overlapping each other, they should be merged into one thing. And the way that we do that is you go here to Object, Path, go to Path, and we do Union. Okay, so now we'll see that we just have the outline. If I do that, right? So now things have sort of been merged into one outline, and that makes things a little nicer. All right, so then what we will do is we will save this here into a file. So I will call it drawing demo, save, then come here back into Kicad, for which I have my, my Python shell open. And you'll see that I ran it before to get this Lydia in the square. But if I were to run this again, it would just reload Lydia in the square again. So I need to remind myself here to go to drawing _ demo. Save that, and then here I can rerun it again by doing this and this. And so now we'll see that we have this Kicad is fun zone, which if I move it around, move it up here. So now we have this Kicad is fun zone within our PCB new. So if we didn't just hit B to fill all bounds, we don't really get anything because there's actually no ground in there yet. So here I happen to have a transistor connected to ground, which you can see here, ground. So we'll connect that over to here. It needs to be on the right via. And do that. So now we have some ground wire in there, and if I do B, I have a filled Kicad is zone, but notice here that the periods or the dots on the eyes are not filled in. So anyway, hopefully that will help you replicate what I have here. I think that it makes the possibility of having some nice artwork within your ground planes perhaps. I also plan on doing a outline, an edge cut base conversion as well, which could perhaps give us some neat looking PCB outlines. Anyway, hopefully you found it helpful, and leave comments if you have any questions or anything else that you'd like me to clarify.